for joining us. All right, and thanks, Sean, as well. All right, welcome everyone to the Wallet Interoperability Special Interest Group call for June 16th, 2025. Today on the agenda, we will hear about the DID method standardization effort from Jonathan Rayback. We are recording this call. It will be posted on the meeting page later today. We are following the Linux Foundation antitrust policy and the OpenWallet Foundation Code of Conduct. Let's see, are there any announcements before we get started or any introductions? If anybody is new to the call and would like to hop off mute and introduce themselves and say a bit about their work or what they're interested in this space, now would be a great time to do that. All right. Let's see, Sean, did you have any specific announcements that you wanted to call out?
This is the first week in forever I don't have any announcements thanks to the doldrums of summer. We do have an architecture SIG call coming up right after this one. I'll post the link to that in chat in a second. We're going to talk about a proposal we're making to the TAC around what was called the architecture mapping. But if anyone would like to join us, David Alexander is our co-chair and he will be there. So thanks everybody. That's it for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. All right, let's see. In terms of project updates, Stephen, did you want to speak a bit on Akapai?
Sure. The latest was at our meeting last week. Dave McKay and team presented again on Canon and the progress they're making there. Canon allows for storing all except the keys in a separate database from Ascar. So you keep the key and key management aspects of Ascar, but you put all of the other objects into a quote-unquote normal database, and they've done it in Postgres, SQLite, and also Mongo, so providing different options there, and that gives enables better user interfaces. Basically, they're able to query the data more precisely, faster, filtering on the data, pulling at what a user might be interested in seeing on the screen, and only what the user might want to be interested in seeing on the screen. So much a faster user interface. So good progress there. We continue to prepare for a new release, and there's a work on a concurrency issue that we're working through as well. So that's the stuff going on in Akapai.
Awesome. Let's see, any updates related to Credo, Bifold, Owl, VCX, SUJAT, JS, or any other projects?
Wish we were getting updates. I know there's tons going on in Credo, and all of that folds down into Bifold. So lots going on there. VCGov in particular is working on DID WebEH support in Credo and Bifold, and hence the VC wallet.
So the VCX team is out. They were out last week and this week. I believe they're back in action next week. Stephen and Shar, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the other big projects and talk to them about updating, even if they can't make this call, like getting in a bullet or two for Bifold and Credo and Owl and SDJot JavaScript, so folks know what's coming. I'll talk to them about that.
And Romek, you've been working through building out on Bifold and Credo, haven't you?
Yeah, I'm struggling with it. I'm having a fight with Apple Docker, which is making hell. Docker doesn't network on a Mac, and I've tried both Intel and Silicon. It's just Docker's broken at the moment on Macs, which is making my life hell for building.
That's frustrating.
It's very frustrating because I'd love to build the whole system and I can't build it at the moment, so I'm going dependency checking, so which is a monster in itself as well. But yeah, I'm still building. I've actually paused on building because I was absolutely trashing a Mac doing so. And so in light of not trashing it, I decided that probably just keeping it sane and trying not to actually carry on building for now. So I've parked the builds for now. I have documented everything, and you've got the talk stuff from me, Char, as well, for August the 4th.
Yes. Yes, looking forward to having you speak
Okay.
on the call. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
awesome.
mostly what I'm doing. I'm carrying on. If basically building on a Mac is a pain for everything, which is what I'm going to talk about.
Okay. All right. Cool. Unless there are any more project updates, just a quick look ahead at upcoming topics. We will hear about the Mosip Inji wallet, the SDJS library. We will hear about the Global Digital Collaboration Conference that's coming up, as well as Kudimi. And then we will have Ramek as well present. So yeah, lots of great topics lined up today and in the next few weeks. So let's see. With that, are there any other announcements or updates? I know there was a big announcement from Apple related to the digital credentials API and MDoc support. We can I think that would be a great thing to explore in a future topic. But yeah, I want to make sure there's plenty of time for Jonathan to speak. So with that, any other announcements or introductions? And thanks, Sean, for sending out those links in the chat. All right. With that, I will pass it over to you, Jonathan. Thanks again so much for joining us.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Shar. I will, let's see, share my screen, see if I can do that. Yes. All right. You should see a slide presentation.
You can see your screen. You sound good.
Great. And let me just put this in
The slideshow, click slideshow.
There we go. Yeah, that's cool. Except I don't need that part of it. There we go. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's good to be here. I've never attended this working group meeting. I have actually recently been working a bit with Credo, and have found it very interesting. So I'm glad that there's work going on there. So yeah, my name is Jonathan Rayback, and I am a chair of the DID Methods Working Group that is at the Decentralized Identity Foundation DID Methods Working Group. A couple of the folks on the call here are also regular attendees and participants in that working group. And I've been asked today to walk through, I suppose, DID method standardization in general, as far as I understand it, but more specifically what's going on at DIF. And so I have a few slides here and we'll go through the material, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of time for discussion and questions, and not even sure I'll take up the full hour. So I guess we'll see. It depends on how interested you are and how many questions you are and how much stuff we have to talk about. Yeah, I guess I could probably just my own personal background. I haven't met all of you, certainly some of you I have, but I started my journey in decentralized identity as part of the Evernym team back in 2018. I headed up the engineering group there and really was bitten by the bug and have been quite active in the community since then. If you're a regular attendee at IAW, you definitely will see me there. And have done a number of presentations in recent iterations of that conference. And I currently am independent and do consulting, technical consulting, which includes programming. I've worked on a number of open source projects right now. And most recently, I've been involved with DidWebS, quite involved with DidWebS, and doing various implementation efforts there, as well as some of the standardization work. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I'm up to. Okay, so first I just want to talk about standardization in general, standardization efforts elsewhere, at least that I'm aware of. And I kind of want to make this point up front because it's, I think, underlying the philosophy of what's going on at DIF. And that is that, at least at DIF, DIF does not consider itself a standards organization, at least in a formal sense. And so, real standardization occurs at some very specific places, at least insofar as want it to be supported by government use cases, very officially, et cetera, et cetera. And that would be largely W3C and ISO. But there is this effort in Europe, commissioned by the European Commission and member states, to formalize and standardize DID EBSI. And I guess I didn't put the link to that here. Hang on. I have that. I'll add it into the chat maybe later when we get a chance, but there's a link to this page that you can dig into this if you're interested in it. We'll talk more about W3C in a minute. And then ISO, the only DID method possible effort that I'm aware of is at Trust over IP as part of the Carry Suite working group. DID WebS has been included in that working group, and actually formal work on it has just barely picked up again. Our first meeting to discuss DID WebS within the context of the Carry Suite working group is tomorrow. But there is thoughts that there's a path through the Carry Suite working group through Trust over IP to ISO that has been discussed. I honestly can't give you more information than that, other than I know it's been discussed. And so there's a chance that DID method may end up as part of the Carry Suite working group into some sort of effort to be standardized at ISO. But that's, like I say, I don't know much more about it than that. So this is what I'm aware of in terms of standardization elsewhere. And I'll move into what we're doing at DIF. So at DIF, we have the DID methods working group, and our page can be found here. This is where you can kind of see where all the work's happening, meeting notes, the agenda, schedule for meetings. We meet every Wednesday in the morning US time. And there are a couple things that are going on within the methods working group. The first thing that we did was we created a place for people to make proposals for us to consider various DID methods. And these are they. I can maybe give an example of, well, let's look at this one, DID WebVH. I know that Stephen put a lot of work into this one here. So this this is a template, and you fill out this template, and then this is sort of the way that somebody formally proposes that a DID method should be considered by the working group. And there's a number of just general information here, kind of the background, benefits, and then there's this kind of matrix table that you fill out, kind of explaining how the DID method relates to the various categories here. I'll just kind of scroll down it a little bit here slowly. You can kind of scan it. So that was the kind of the first thing that we did. From there, we kind of evolved into a couple streams of work. One is that we have completed a draft for the charter for the proposed W3C DID methods working group. That charter can be found here, and I'll go into a little more detail in the next slide. But this is under active discussion right now. There's an active conversation going on about the contents of this charter, and our goal is to see, the charter approved and the DID methods working group at W3C up and running, hopefully, in months' time. But it's a W3C, so we'll see. But we're hopeful, and at this point, Marcus Sabadello and myself are listed as the proposed chairs for that working group, and more information on it to come as it moves through the approval process at W3C. The next thing that we did is we sort of to the point of the first slide, where so DIF is not a formal standards body, and just because DIF would claim something is standardized doesn't necessarily mean that government XYZ or large corporation XYZ would consider that as the same. But what service do we really provide at DIF in terms of DID methods and standardization in general? And I think the kind of point of view that we're taking is that we are a standardization incubation organization, and that we want to help any DID method become worthy of standardizing, capable of being standardized, standardizable, however you want to say it, whether or not it actually goes to a formal standards body to be standardized. And in particular, we have quite a number of, I guess, less well-known, to possibly more well-known, but blockchain-based DID methods that likely would not be standardized through the W3C, don't really have a standards bodies of their own, and don't have an obvious path to standardization, and frankly, probably don't even care about standardization, but would like some badge or token or indication that their DID method is solid and stable and usable, and you can kind of take the claims to the bank, and so that's kind of, I think, this concept of diff recommended status. It's not official. It's definitely in development. We're working through it right now to try to understand kind of what the process is. But that's sort of our goal, is to create a way to do an assessment that is not qualitative, meaning we're not going to we're not necessarily going to care about the details that you've chosen for your DID method. We're going to be neutral on that topic. We're not going to play favorites in that sense. But what we are going to do is provide a venue for you to undergo scrutiny by peers, and for us to ask deep questions. And, if you claim that you can support, 100,000 transactions per second, great. Why? How? Show us that. We're not gonna we don't have an opinion as to whether that's good enough or not good enough, but we would like to know, how did you come to that conclusion? And someone who uses your DID method, how can they take that claim to the bank? So that's sort of the way we're looking at it. There's a table right now, and again, this is all in process, but there are a few DID methods that we've have been proposed through the proposal process that are now on the table. And the thought is that at some point there would be, here at the last column, some of these DID methods would have a yes that would say, diff has recommended this DID method. The method that's furthest through the process right now is DID WebVH. Again, Stephen did a wonderful presentation. He did kind of the first deep dive. He was the inaugural run of it. And we're now in the process of evaluating the content of that presentation and determining the process for the next steps. And we're grateful for Stephen's patience as we work through that process. So that's kind of where we are at diff. Any questions so far on either the first slide or the second slide before I just jump into a little bit of what the W3C charter looks like?
I've got a question.
Sure.
Often when you're exploring these areas, it can feel like a Venn diagram on steroids with lots of overlap and conflicting. What is your process for trying to reconcile those and come up with effectively a qualitative judgment?
For DID methods?
Yeah, different ones, and comparing them and the overlaps between them.
Yeah. Well, so I think our philosophy, our working philosophy at least, is that we're not going to make a qualitative judgment. We're not going to pick winners. What we are going to do is, if a method is proposed for us to evaluate, we're going to make sure that the claims that DID method makes are justifiable and can be trusted. And so, again, if you think of this from the point of view of what we're trying to do, is say the materials for a given DID method are ready to be standardized, could be standardized if a standards body were to pick it up. The specification is mature enough, the claims are strong, the thinking behind the design is consistent, et cetera, without making qualitative judgments. That's kind of what we're looking at trying to do, is give DID method designers an opportunity to kind of claim that stamp that, yeah, somebody, our peers that's neutral, looked at this, and the things that we say about it have been deemed to be trustable, trustworthy by our peers.
Thank you.
Cool. I see Jim has a hand up.
Yeah, just looking at what you're proposing for, I'll call it this did method registry, fundamentally is just the idea that you're providing your verification is, in a sense, just a credential that says for these 7 categories, this did method proposal has provided, I'll say, I'll call it useful documentation or proof of maybe 5 out of the 7, something like that, without making, as you said, the judgment of what's appropriate or what's not. Is this did method better than somebody else's did method? That comparison model is not part of your stuff. It's much like a scientific journal reviewing my research, and I have 7 categories to, in a sense, prove that my research has some level of validity and some utility, hopefully. But
Yeah.
I'm interpreting that as sort of
Yes.
the model of what you're doing, if I've got it right.
Absolutely. That's absolutely the point. And the reason that we don't want to make qualitative judgment is because we feel like that's not our place. We don't want to be in the position of picking winners at all. It's kind of we're averse to that idea. But because we believe that, there are a number of did methods for a reason, and that there are different did methods that are going to be very appropriate in certain circumstances and very inappropriate in other circumstances. And that's up to the implementer to decide, what works and what doesn't. But what we would like is for the implementer to have a great place to go to say, I'm considering these 4 did methods. Which of these am I more likely to pick? And if there's one of those that has gone through this process that has been kind of vetted by peers, then that might be an argument for using that one over another. Sam.
Yeah, so I'm gonna add a few. So I'm a regular attendee of the group, and Jonathan's doing a great job. But this is a really important point that we have discussed a lot. So I think it's worth some time here to be clear about it. This is more like an objective assessment, and so there will be no in order ranking of what the group thinks is good, but rather an assessment on various criteria of what has been evaluated, and that is useful for exactly the reason Jonathan just articulated, is that people need a way to look at something that says, hey, this has been verified to have these qualities, or these, and is useful in these particular areas because of this. So they can make some sort of a judgment call about what to use. And right now there's nothing. And the reason there is nothing is because of how complicated it is to produce a good, better, best type of ranking for these things. And so we've jumped into like what is possible to accomplish, which is that objective assessment of various criteria, rather than any other. And there's other groups that can make any judgments they want about what's best here. But the having something that can be used is a heck of a lot better than just having nothing at all.
Yeah, great, Sam. I appreciate the additional color, because that is very consistent with what we've been talking about. And I think it's the kind of role that DIF would like to play in the ecosystem, is to be the venue for these types of assessments, and providing that kind of level of sanity. And I do like the concept, the comparison with a scientific journal, the notion of sort of peer review, providing that opportunity for peer review for these did methods and their claims. Okay, anything else before I move on? I have one more slide. It's about the W3C effort, but is there anything else you guys would like to ask before I move on? Okay, let's move on. So I would say this is the first accomplishment, the first kind of concrete accomplishment of the working group, was the production of this charter, draft charter. And I guess in a way, I would say that it's the precursor to the diff recommended, the conceptual diff recommended status that we just discussed, in the sense that there are a number of web-based did methods that have had a considerable amount of work done on them. They have quite mature specifications. They are possibly in production. They have one or more implementations. They're fairly well known, understood. They've been measured in many ways, and those methods are certainly ready to be considered for standardization. Perhaps some polishing still needs to be done, but like largely speaking, they could arrive at a standards body kind of ready to go. And that's precisely what we've done with this charter. We've basically said to W3C, we propose that there be the standardization of 2 or 3 DID methods in the 3 following categories: an ephemeral method, a web-based method, a decentralized method, or methods. Again, it will be up to the working group at W3C to make this determination, but the charter allows for consideration of methods in those 3 categories. And we provide as the backdrop the specs for the these following DID methods: DID key, DID web, and the 3 kind of advanced versions of DID web VH, DID web plus, DID web S, and then decentralized methods like DID skin and DID peer. And so what we'd really love to see out of the W3C is, the fruits of that working group would be formal standardization at the W3C of, at the very least, a web-based method. I mean, that would be the table stakes. There has to be at least standardization of one method. And whether that method is literally one of these that are listed, whole cloth, or if it ends up being some derivative of or combination of those, would be up to the working group. But ideally, we'd also see perhaps an ephemeral standardization, like, for example, DID key, or again, something that's inspired by DID key, and a decentralized method. The draft charter is here, as I pointed out, and again, it's open for comment. There's active conversation going on right now, and we would love to see this finished in the next couple of months, but we'll see how it goes. So that's really what I've got to talk about today. That's the large content that I have, but happy to have more discussion or answer questions as interested by the group.
Can I ask you, what sort of help do you need? What sort of engagement do you need? Are you looking for more information, more DID methods, extra pairs of hands? What helps you with your mission, as it were?
I think just people participating in the working group at DIF would be great. I mean, that's really the biggest thing, having participation there. I think the thing that we're finding most difficult is providing an adequate vetting of the DID methods. I've mentioned Steven's name a couple of times because he did such a great job. I mean, he was able to present in 1 hour a really large amount of information, about DID web VH that, probably represents the limit of what anybody could present in an hour. And yet still, I feel like we sort of only scratched the surface, and there's still, more evaluation that we could do. But that takes time and effort, and it becomes frustrating at some point if people propose methods and we can't move it through the process. So, just extra hands certainly helps. And if you go to the the page here, you can find out all about the meetings and how to participate in DIF meetings and yada yada yada. So that's certainly a way to help.
And what are the critical qualities of people to be valuable contributors at meetings? What do they need to know? What skills, what background?
I mean, I would say that obviously familiarity with DIDs and DID methods, the DID core data model helps a lot. Maybe familiarity, more in-depth familiarity with one or more specific implementations of DID methods is also quite helpful, because it, allows the person to sort of understand the extension, the sort of inflection points, the extension points of the core model.
Practical use cases.
But I think anybody from anybody who wants to learn and is has a relatively critical and evaluative nature certainly can help.
Now, you said with a degree of caution, or W3C is W3C, so let's see. What is the challenge when trying to collaborate or get a draft charter with W3C agreed?
And I want to be clear, I believe that a charter will be approved. I really do think that will happen. It's just a matter of how long will it take. Right now, there's an active debate happening about the charter, about whether it's appropriate or not to have the purview of the working group be more than one DID method. So there's a back and forth, and that will have to be resolved, obviously, first before we get any further. But we're asserting that it's totally appropriate to consider a constrained scope. It's still a constrained scope to say, we would like to see in these three categories from the following specs that represents a constrained scope and should not be, interpreted as too wide open for a charter. And I guess that's the core of the debate right now.
Thank you.
Shar, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering if we could go into a little bit more detail about the criteria that the DID methods are being evaluated against.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a good idea. And then I see Steven, your hand's up, so maybe let's see what you've got first before I go into that. And if you've got something you'd like to say about it, otherwise I can go there and we come back to you, either whatever works.
Why don't I, while you prepare that, let me ask a question, because mine was a group question. And so why don't I go ahead with mine, and then you can come back to this. What I was wondering was, how many are using DIDs or want to use DIDs? That's one of the things I wonder about is, there isn't many, like DID web is the main, DID key, DID web are the main known ones. DID web is known to have lots of concerns, and so people use other than DIDs, and I'm just wondering if people are using DIDs or other things. And so maybe, I don't know if we want to take that question now, but just have people think about it and come back with what they're thinking about on that, on the use of DIDs. Is the EU wallet DID friendly? I know SD Jots are kind of moving away, or the OpenID has sort of moved away from DIDs in a way. And so just wondering about the thoughts on that.
That's a great question.
Ledger agnostic would be my first wish.
Yeah, so it's a good question. Why don't we, I like what you suggested, Stephen. Let me go through this table here and talk about kind of the inputs, and then it might be a good way to kind of follow up on that. I'm also interested in the question, and what you said, David, ledger agnostic, there's a lot of, I think I would like to respond to what you just said, but let's maybe go through this first and we can come back to that. So these columns kind of represent the criteria, if you will, and I do think it's, for what's out there today in terms of evaluative material, it's comprehensive. I would say I feel like we've done a good job of capturing kind of what exists today. There has been a decent amount of work already done on how to evaluate a DID method, and so we didn't start from scratch. We're leveraging a lot of existing stuff. So the first input is just the spec itself. So for example, the one I've been working on is DidWebS. This is the spec, in the current version, and you can, as part of the evaluation process, one would read the spec and would kind of get an idea of what the DID method is, what it claims to do, how it's used, what the intended kind of audience is, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're wanting to know about DidWebS, this is where you would go. This is the spec. The next is the W3C methods registry. So that is found here. And you'll notice, for example, that already DidWebS is not part of the registry. DidWebVH is, for example, and you can see some are and some aren't. So that's a criteria. And so these are the known DID methods according to W3C in the ecosystem. The next is the proposal template. So that is, have they filled out the our DID methods working group proposal template. So like for DidWeb Plus, this was I showed an example of this earlier for DidWeb VH, but this is the proposal for DidWeb Plus. It's the template that we've put together, has kind of the opening statement and then the table of kind of evaluative qualities, scalability and performance. There's the answer. It has elements for hyperscaling using content delivery networks, et cetera, et cetera. Does it, does it have privacy preserving crypto, multi-factor binding to DNS? There's all these just sort of, I would say this is a fairly arbitrary set of questions, but it was kind of the set that we came up with at the beginning, and it's the method that it's the methodology by which one uses to propose a did method. You fill out this form. That's kind of step one. And then we've got has it passed the W3C test suite? And again, some have, some haven't. For example, DidWeb has here, and I assume this takes us to the test suite results. The next is it supported by the diff universal resolver? And many are. Some are, but it's broken. DidWebS is, for example, supported by the resolver. It has a driver, but the driver doesn't currently work, so that needs to be fixed. But that's another element that we're considering things by. And it hasn't been evaluated using the did traits methodology, and that is right here. So this sort of lists a set of traits that a did method could have, and you evaluate the did method against those traits. You can basically say this did method has the following traits. It supports delete, it is self-certifying, and supports pre-rotation of keys, for example, or it is, it supports the deactivate feature, it supports an update, and it has endpoints, or any of the combination of these traits. So that's one of the criteria that we use. And then the deep dive. So the deep dive is the deep dive is the vehicle by which the group does the evaluation. It's the primary vehicle. So when I say that, Stephen did an hour-long presentation on DidWeb VH, that was the first deep dive into DidWeb VH. And he, came with some materials. He walked through the materials for the group. The group asked questions, challenged him on a certain number of items, and then we ran out of time. So, that's where we're really trying to determine, like, what is the best method and most efficient method for us to provide these evaluations that lets us be sufficient in terms of kind of making the claim that we want to make about a particular did method. But that's what the deep dive is. So any questions on these criteria? I don't know how familiar any of you are with any of them, but
yeah, I was curious about the test suite. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So there is a test suite, and as you can see, only a few of the methods have passed the test suite. I don't actually know the whole history of the test suite. I don't know if either Stephen or Sam might have some comments on that, but it's a way of determining kind of how well does the did method align with the core model. So I presume that something that's passed the test suite is essentially saying, is not in any way incompatible with the core model, supports all of the requirements that the core model requires.
Okay, interesting. Thanks.
Sure. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was helpful.
I guess to elaborate a little bit, keep in mind that there are, I keep hearing this number. I don't know who's actually counted, but there's something like 250, did methods. But there is a core data model that, is a recommendation by the W3C, and presumably every did method that exists out there is includes, as a subset, those features, and then is some superset of that, has additional extensions, which ideally are registered. So you can extend a did method, and you can register those extensions. So you can say, insofar as our did method differs in any way from the core model, here's the extension that we've registered to explain how it differs and why, and so that everybody knows. Not every did method certainly does that, but that's what we would like to see. We would like to see if there are any extensions to the core model, they should be registered. And you may have all kinds of additional capabilities above and beyond what the core model supports. We just, at the very least, you should support what the core model requires, or else you sort of can't call yourself a did method. Maybe I'm saying that too harshly, I don't know, but I guess that'd be my point of view sort of about it. But okay, any other questions on this? Okay, yeah. So to the question that Stephen asked earlier, I would also love to hear kind of from the group perception of kind of did methods and dids, and how relevant they are, how many are using it, which ones, etc. So like when you say ledger agnostic, David, for example, there are obviously a number of did methods that are ledger agnostic. Largely speaking, any of the did web methods are ledger agnostic. There's a relatively recent did method called did skid that's meant to be a representation of any did that's built using a self-certifying identifier, and it is very explicitly both ledger agnostic and web agnostic. It's endpoint agnostic. So, if people are looking for those types of methods, they do exist.
My particular interest is we are a safe, secure cloud provider that works for citizens, people, and our focus is on giving them independence, but critically interoperability as they traverse different ecosystems with different architectures. So finding a way of reconciling different did methods and working out how the data that they hold about themselves, the verified data and a whole range of other things, can be packaged up and compiled and make use of these different methods is my interest. So it's interoperability is what my core question is, really.
I would personally point you to the diff universal resolver project. I really think that that's the type of thing to look at, because presumably being able to leverage the drivers that are there allow potentially quite a high degree of being agnostic and supporting whatever the popular did methods are as far as you see them.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else in terms of usage, did familiarity, your wishes and wants around dids? I don't know. Did key, for example, is perhaps the simplest possible did method. Does anybody use did key here for any of your solutions?
Yes, lots.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was also mentioned did JWK, which is equivalent to did key.
Yeah.
Love to see both of those officially standardized.
Mm-hmm.
We're working towards production did web VH pretty quickly. Right now we're figuring out the last steps we've got to go to get there, so working on that.
And so it's not a surprise to me at all, Stephen, that you guys use did key and all of that. I wonder if there are other folks on the call who use, say, did key or did JWK or any other did methods. Do any of you use any other did methods? So I guess that's the answer to your question, Stephen.
Yeah. Um, Obviously, as well, for anyone using didcom, didpeer is used.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was
That's
gonna
just a
say
given.
did peer as well, did indie, also on the Indicio side, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting.
Any other questions or comments I can entertain? Well, I hope that this, oh, Samuel, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can just speak aloud what I already wrote in the chat, that we in the FindiNet are using DidWeb, and because we follow the decentralized identity interop profile, we also use the DidJWK for natural
Mhm.
persons.
Okay, very cool. I guess I'd be curious to ask this question, as you know, somebody who's participating in the development of a DidWeb X method. Are you finding DidWeb to be sufficient for your, you know, kind of security needs and whatnot? Are you interested in any of the other kind of DidWeb extension methods like DidWeb VH, DidWeb Plus, DidWeb S, etc.? Have you looked into those at all? And do you find that at one point, you know, you're going to want to migrate to one of those, or do you feel like DidWeb will continue to be sufficient for your use case?
Yeah, we are looking to upgrade to WebH probably in the near future. But when we were standardizing the version 4 of the deep profile, we decided that it's not really widely supported enough yet, because the deep profile tries to pick most of the features that are already implemented or were easily implementable. So, but there was already mentioned in that spec that deep WebVH will probably be the next evaluation.
Okay. I mean, in a nutshell, the issue here is, and maybe I'll just outline this really quickly for the group in case you're not familiar with the kind of the concept, but DidWeb is a great innovation in the sense that it provides a very easy method for discovery. You know, it just leverages domain ecosystem, kind of domain name ecosystem for resolving a did document that gives you the current key for the did, key or keys for the did. It has a major weakness in the sense that you're completely dependent on trusting, you know, that ecosystem, and all of the weaknesses that we know are inherent to that ecosystem. You get a did document and you completely just have to trust what you get. You know, hopefully it hasn't been hijacked. Hopefully it hasn't been intercepted. Hopefully you're not, you know, hopefully you're getting the right thing. Hopefully the domain is controlled by the person you want it to be controlled by, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a number of methods that seek to resolve that problem by providing alongside, in some method, alongside the key information you would get from, say, a did document, provide a ledger-like, you know, immutable history that you can use to verify that the key that you're getting, in fact, is the correct key and has the verifiable history and, you know, is trustable. That's the idea behind all of the three that I mentioned did kind of WebX methods. Samuel.
Yeah, maybe my personal point of view is that if you cannot rely on the DNS, if you don't trust the domain name system to work, then it's very little that you can do online. And so
Sure.
I think what we are really looking for the extensions is the key rotation. And because the web plane doesn't have that, then I think WebH fixes that issue. But personally, I'm not so interested in kind of additional guarantees on top of the DNS, or something that wants to fix DNS or do something else.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to a question of just, you know, as is everything security-wise, it just comes down to a question of level of it's personal evaluation, and obviously the DNS system, because it existed for a long time and absolutely has known weaknesses, right? 100% has totally known weaknesses. Like they're very aware of what the weaknesses are. And if those weaknesses are not of concern, then because, there are obviously ways to mitigate for those weaknesses as well. And if those are not of concern to you, then that's a perfectly valid decision to make.
Yeah, and actually, for example, Train as a trust mechanism, which is built on DNS and just kind of publishing DNS records creates your trust. I wouldn't rely on that because it might be too easy for a external provider to just hijack your domain or just add new records into your DNS while you're away or not looking. And so kind of using only the DNS as the information for or saying who is who or whether this is verified, I'm somewhat skeptical towards that, mainly because DNS servers are often outsourced, and then this outsourcing partner can do stuff like stuff which is hard to kind of find out. But really, if you are using your primary domain as the issuer identifier for yourself, I think if you cannot trust that apple.com is Apple and google.com is Google, if you cannot trust that, then it's really hard to trust anything. So if you are using your A record DNS name as your issuer identifier, and I think building the edit method on top of that has really a lot of power because people are already familiar with domain names and they kind of can link them to established players.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of the rotation concept that Samuel's mentioning, what the other kind of weakness behind DidWeb typically is that it's difficult with just the DidWeb method as it currently stands to get the definitive latest key. And all of the other kind of DidWebX methods that you see out there have a solution to that problem where, even if you're not going to use the additional information for, paranoia or security, whatever, you can use it absolutely to get the latest iteration of the key, the latest rotated key, and get the definitive key. So that is another advantage of the methods that are extending DidWeb. Jim.
Just following up on that concept, having worked on the networking side a lot, I will say you're right that trust is an issue everywhere, end to end on anything. And so I guess the thing I'll throw out there as a strategy for better trust is the idea that you have to balance, cost, performance, criticality, risk, and all of those factors when you decide how am I going to implement trust. And one of the stronger patterns I would think is that you say, okay, maybe I am trusting google.com in a session, but like at the start of a session, maybe I don't, much like a CAPTCHA, challenge or something like that. And if you're using what I call smarter, I'll call it methods, AI-based or whatever, to make that risk assessment based on criticality, you have the ability real time to run end to end all the way to the bottom. I'll call it ugly, detailed verification of that stuff, something like that as a strategy. So I've done that in networking to a degree. I mean, not as elegant as I'm discussing, but I certainly have done that where you go down to a low level to verify those kind of things. And I do think that at the end of the day, you're going to have some sort of a dynamic model like that that allows the flexibility to say, hey, boom, I need to see all that this time. It's a challenge. It doesn't matter how many times I come back to this site. I want to be able to do it at any point in time. And I think that would improve, at least to some degree, the level of risk we face today on a lot of these, I'll call it network links, things like DNS servers and so on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just to be frank, within the decentralized identity community, there are all manners of points of view, and something like Carry, key event rotation infrastructure basically, says you can't entirely trust the internet. You just can't. And so there's, the attempt is to build an overlay that solves the existing problems of the internet. And if that's something that you really care about, then that's something that you can use to obviate all kinds of issues that you can't obviate as things stand today. The trust spanning protocol from Trust over IP is a similar idea. It's something that spans, on top of a network to provide an additional layer of security that you don't get otherwise. And that all comes down to personal, threshold of security, what your personal threshold of comfort is. But it's an interesting time we live in. So any other questions? Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad I was able to present, and hopefully I did provide some value to the group, and people, are walking away knowing more about the topic than they did before.
Thank you. It's very useful indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. This was great. Great presentation, great discussion. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. Is there somewhere that you would like for me to send a PDF of these slides or something so you can post it or not?
Yes, that would be great. Yeah, if you could send this to my email, just on
Okay.
our existing thread, I will post them on the meeting page so that those following along in the recording can also access the slides. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Could we have the links of the stuff you displayed on the screen as well in those slides? Because that would be
They should be in the slide. I mean, when I create the PDF, they'll be included there. Yeah.
great stuff.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Sure.
Thanks everybody for joining. Next week, we will hear about the Mozip Inji wallet. So join us for that as well. And yeah, have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you all later. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.